whenever somebody would get in trouble, they would say, well, oh, the devil made me do it, or the devil had me do it. And they were always blaming Lucifer for everything. He's tired of the human race blaming him for stuff. So it's kind of in that important progress where he's going to use the human race for a change. And he wants to go back and reclaim his glory. Do you realize that God gives all human knowledge? A child may or may not have had the knowledge to have cured a form of cancer. How can I believe in something I can't see or touch or hear? Why not? I mean, why not write something that a lot of people could understand? For those out there listening or they're writing or even reading, don't stop. Whenever you write, everybody wants to write something special that nobody else has ever read, or they want to write for themselves. Sometimes it's really good to share.
Life flows like an endless ocean of stories. We often miss these precious tales as we rush through our days, too consumed by daily struggles to notice the poetry swirling around us. Yet within these stories lie the keys to our past, sparks for our creativity, and fresh winds to fill our sails. I am Abhra, a writer based in Melbourne, in quest of those stories with diverse voices that tell them from every corner of the world. Welcome to Stories and Stanza. Hi Bruce, welcome to Stories and Stanza.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
Look forward to talking to you about your writing journey. And in Stories and Stanza, I speak to writers, and my objective is to amplify their voices. When I wrote my first book, I felt that it's very difficult to share my own word around with the whole world and just say that I have written a book because I'm self-published. And that is where I was kind of getting started with the idea of the podcast, that if I can invite writers to a podcast where they can come and talk about their journey and share something from their book, so that it gives them a platform to share their work, and then that way they can talk about their creativity and their motivation, their challenges, etc., and share it with the world. So look forward to hearing from you today. And before we get started, for our listeners, could you briefly talk about your writing journey?
Wow. I think my writing journey started probably back in about 2016, 2017. I came up with Devil's Delight when I was very, very young. Um, there was a term and phrase used when I was a child, pretty much growing up until I was a teenager, that when individuals got in trouble, and God, this saying and term probably dates back 16, 1700s. And whenever somebody would get in trouble, they would say, well, oh, the devil made me do it, or the devil had me do it. And they were always blaming Lucifer for everything. They got themselves into trouble, or somebody got them into trouble. They would just blame Lucifer for everything. So I kind of just kept a little bit of that terminology in my mind, and it stuck with me. And I finally, like I said, 2015, 2016, I just decided to sit down, and I had thought of a piece that's really never been written before. And I brought Lucifer into a whole new subject and way of life where he's being blamed for everything, and he's decided to take it to the next level. He's tired of the human race blaming him for stuff. So it's kind of in that important progress where he's going to use the human race for a change, and he wants to go back and reclaim his glory. He wants to be that dignified angel all over again, but still have things done his way. And it's all about what you do, how you do it, the way you want to do it, when you want to do it. So they want to give him something to blame for. Well, he's going to take the blame for something he's actually going to do. And he wants to get to that part where to remove St. Peter from his place and his position and remove his book of souls and Lucifer place himself in charge. That way, it kind of allows him to say yay or nay, you can cross over. So the story, when I thought about it, for years, I listened to everybody, I listened to people, and talking to those who even said, yeah, the devil made me do this, or I did this because the devil told me to. I listened to their stories, and it was kind of one of those formulations that, okay, I'm crafting my own story from everybody else's, but it's putting that pitch and the touch on it to telling the story and putting Lucifer at the center of it and building the story from there on on that. So that's how I kind of came up with Devil's Delight and how everything was imagined when I started creating the story, bringing in characters, and it's really not without to say that, you're going to have adults involved in it, you're going to have the fantasy of angels involved in it, you're going to have the reality of stories of what St. Peter, what he may hear and he may not hear, and there will be children involved in it.
It's a very interesting setup, and I look forward to exploring that through our discussion today. But in this section, I request writers if they can read something from their book, and it can be anything. It's up to you. Just to
Oh
give
yeah,
the listeners an idea that what are we talking about.
yeah. This is kind of the insert from St. Peter where he's having people come up to him, and as he reads little sections from their history from his book and kind of wondering what's going to happen. And, as they're standing there in front of him, he may ask them a question. They've got to answer it. And in some cases, it's very hard for them to give an answer, or they give an answer that they just want to give. But we'll start here. Excerpt Heaven's Day. Large ornate gates stand open, several yards behind an old man at a podium with a book in it. There is a line of people extending in front of him, farther than the eye can see. The ground is made of white fluffy clouds. Old man, Melvin Harris. Melvin Harris steps up to the podium. Old man, so you stand before me to enter God's kingdom. Melvin nods. Yes, St. Peter, if I am allowed. St. Peter, looking at the book, it says here that you were killed on your way to work by a drunk driver, sadly to say. Melvin, I did not know I was driving home and everything just went black and then I was here. St. Peter, it was simply your time, my boy. You may pass. Melvin, thank you, sir. St. Peter, bless you. St. Peter nods and Melvin enters the gates behind him. St. Peter calls for Deborah Lynn. The next person in line comes before St. Peter. Deborah, yes, sir. St. Peter, I see that you were getting an abortion from your neighborhood and bled out. Deborah, Yes, sir. I didn't realize I was dead until I woke up here. I wasn't ready to be a mom. St. Peter, the child was not ready to lose its life either, Deborah, but I had no way to take care of a child. St. Peter, then the child had no way of defending itself either. Do you realize that God gives all human knowledge? A child may or may not have had the knowledge to have cured a form of cancer. Deborah, I'm sorry. What will happen to me? St. Peter, what will be done to you? The question is, what was done to your child? What will be done to you is not for me to decide. Deborah stands aside. Robert Kind. Robert steps forward. St. Peter flips the pages of his book dismissively, and Deborah passes through the gates. Robert walks up to St. Peter. It says here that you committed suicide, not even thought of the consequences of your doing. Robert, I had no other option at the time. I didn't know what else to do. St. Peter scoffs. Options. There are so many options you felt you had to break God's cardinal rule and take your own life, the one he gave you. Robert, what should I have done? I constantly in pain. It hurts to be alive, and I just wanted the pain to stop. St. Peter, if you had knelt down and opened your mind to God, it would have shown you a better way of life. Robert, it's a little hard to do when God never shows himself. How can I believe in something I can't see or touch or hear? St. Peter looks. Believing without seeing the exact definition of faith, your judgment will be swift, I'm sure. So that's some out of the book. And Devil's Delight, I go on to hit a lot more harder subjects than that, and it it can be effective in certain ways on how people may want to view it and read it and take it as their own. Not judging somebody, not judging anything, but allowing the reader and those who may watch it one day to take their own mind and make their own judgment about how they feel and what they feel when they read stuff. It's really opening up the imagination and letting it kind of go wild when you read it. That's some of the basis of what I look at, what I'm trying to achieve in some of my writing.
That is very interesting. And this is something I always try to understand from my writer guests is that who their book is for, what they intend to convey through their book. And you said it invites you into that world and then it expands much, much wider. That's very fantastic, I'd say.
Thank you.
You mentioned a little bit about why you chose this idea for your book. And can I ask you, what was your starting step or inspiration for writing?
Wow. The starting step, I guess, was putting the idea on paper and then just really diving into the research. And, I'm old fashioned. I hit a library and I started looking at mythology. There's only so much that I was able to get from just one book. So I had to explore and keep writing the idea down and just keep adding to it. So once I had the whole entire idea, then I started forming my story and how I wanted the story to convey. I think I put it all down on paper, and I know I probably wrote it and rewrote it at least 5 different times. And just going through keeping that idea all there, just going through the motions, and I started adding characters, putting the names, trying to imagining who they would look like, an age, a race. The idea, I mean, once you start with that idea and you continue to roll with it and keep moving and keep doing your research, because even at sometimes you're going to stop yourself and you're going to think, okay, I need to add this to the idea. So you're going back and adding more, but it's just keeping your main focus on the big picture of what you want to actually say and how you want to say it. So it's, for me, it was just a lot of research, of course, going over some what's in the Bible and what's not in the Bible, and then finding your fantasy characters through whatever part of life and religion that you may look at. You may bring in, there could be different religions out there that may all say the same thing in each part. So it's stopping in at your local library is what I found, and being able to find what you need for certain characters, what the book may say and what you may want to say and do. So when I'm doing it, I'm putting my own spin on stuff and putting my own spin on the characters, because they have to be able to be believable and yet be able to know where they're going and where you want them to actually go in your story when you're developing it.
And you mentioned that you wrote this about 5 times, and were you writing it on paper or were you typing it?
Actually, the first 2 drafts were done on paper, and then the other 3 times were actually done on the computer. I would just write and redefine, and I just kept redefining everything until I was able to get it to where I want it to be. And that was, going through, and I would make mistakes. Then I go back when I would rewrite it again. I would look at my mistakes, make sure that I check mark them off. I wouldn't do that again. And really just bringing the characters into play, into format. And it took me 5 times to kind of get it to where I wanted it at.
And as they say, it's like never enough. You always think that there is like room for improvement.
Yes, always. Yeah, there's always a lot of room for improvement over everything. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. Plenty of room for improvement.
And now, if you look back to that writing phase, what would you say your biggest challenges were?
Trying to keep everything in a positive way. Trying really not to overthink a lot of things, and overcoming a lot of emotion. That's some of my biggest challenges right there, is, and still today, is overcoming the emotion of what you're doing with your characters. You know, you can always sit there, and because when you're writing each of your characters, you find that you're involved with your own character as well, because you got to put the emotion in the words on that paper, and you're mentally a part of that character as well. And there's times where you're laughing, you find yourself crying, or you find yourself angry or upset. And it's going through those emotions when you're doing what you're doing with your characters and putting the wording down. You can get really involved with your characters, and especially when you got to write it so many times and you got to add the the feeling for everything, the sequences, happy, sad, angry, mad. You're putting your emotion into it, and to other people it may just be words on a paper that they're reading, but it's like I said before, you got to let your imagination kind of run with that character as well.
And you mentioned that now you are taking this to a screenplay and you want to make this like a set of multiple screenplays together. So, do you want to tell us about this project that you are working on?
Wow. Devil's Delight is actually in its screenplay format now. I also have Ladders to Fire that is done. That's follows in line with Devil's Delight. And then I've got DWA, which is in line for the third one, and it's done as well. And Ladders to Fire really picks right up from Devil's Delight. That involves two children and a host of humans and angels. And you get to watch two children evolve and grow on the screenplay for that. And they're very special children because not only are they somewhat human, but it's who their parents were and who their grandparents are, which really truly divides them from other children because they have powers that no human can really see or detect or even tell what these two children have and what they're quite capable of doing to protect themselves, who they love, and coming down to it, how they would use their powers on others if being pushed or shoved. And that, kind of where it falls in line with Devil's Delight. And one of the main characters kind of moves on to DWA, and DWA is all about death. I actually reveal who death is in DWA, and it's really a bigger intake and spin on life, what goes on in life, death. A lot of people don't realize this, and actually, from the time of Garden of Eden of Adam and Eve on up to where we are today, death has had everything to do with every human being. And in the ideology of death, that Lucifer actually is the sole, not creator, but the ruler of death. Lucifer gives commands, and death actually has to do it. That's death's punishment, is that they fall under the rule and thumb of Lucifer. And Lucifer gets quite angry with death, and after taking a beating, there is a skin tone, there's hair in their skin, and it actually reveals who death is. Which I can't tell you who that is right now, but death at one point in time was a human. And for sayings and going, to how death became death. That's where DWA kind of comes into play. One of the main characters from Devil's Delight and Ladders to Fire is one of the children that's actually in DWA. And it's an interesting take, but the character doesn't intervene in anything. It's like they're a ghost in the movie, and there's another child that's involved with death. They seem to do what they can to protect the child, knowing that this child has an expiration date on their life, and still yet death is doing what they can to protect the child. So in that case, you have Lucifer is involved in the going after death. They want to know what's going on. They're angry with death because death has not truly fulfilled their obligation as they're supposed to. So now it's going to be one of those where the ending is not going to be the greatest. It's not going to. It's going to bother people, but it's a beautiful storyline. What death will actually do to save a child. So I'm kind of going to leave it at that.
No, that's fantastic. The human stories and the mythical elements, I think they have gelled with one another really well from what you shared. And are all these different parts published yet, or you're working on it?
No, I'm leaving them in their screenplay format. I've been entering them on festivals on Film Freeway, and I since 2020 I've done really well. I I don't always win, but I do get nominated or I get something for entering the festival. You either place, it can be nominated or a winner, and it kind of goes on. Film Freeway, there are festivals all over the world, and I enter my screenplays into the different festivals, and you've got dozens upon dozens here in the United States. You have some in Australia, you have some in England, France. I mean, they're all over, and they don't just look at it and say no, yes. They actually do take the time. Their judges do go and they read them. It takes them a great deal of time, but they take the time. They read them, and they let you know if you've placed or not. And I mean, you'll still get notifications like, we're sorry you didn't place, but thank you, continue to work. Or you may find that you won or you've been nominated, or the list can really go on from there. To really get it to producers or directors, that's a whole totally different game right there. And a lot of it is working with a manager to find a manager that who will push it to where it needs to be and get it to the right hands. But right now, I think maybe down the line, I may take the first three screenplays and I may turn them into a book. I've been leaning towards it, thinking about how I can bring all three of them together. And there would be a lot of adding to do that, and I may have somebody to help me do that and probably take over and turn it into one very large book.
And writing the novel and writing the screenplay, where do you see yourself most comfortable as?
Ooh, I think the screenplay format of it is where I find myself comfortable. Coming, bringing your story and putting it on paper and working with just the characters really, really stands out a lot quick, very quick, and it's straightforward to the point. You can add a little bit of dialogue, add maybe some tension, and that's where I find myself a lot more comfortable at is on the screenplay side of it. Doing a book, I would probably struggle a great deal. And so that's where somebody else will probably come in and lay down the format for a book and put that into book form for me.
And you mentioned this earlier that when you were writing the first book, it was very difficult to, feel the emotions and convey them in the book. And later you transformed them into screenplay. What I'm trying to understand is, uh, when you're writing it as a book or as a text, then you have more room to, yeah, talk about, build the character, show the surroundings and background and history. You have a lot of tools at your hand, but when you are doing screenplay, then you are visualizing that, and a lot of that goes away. So how do you manage this transition?
Managing the transition would be actually cutting a lot out. The screenplay format it just breaks it down to just lines for the characters. As in the book formatting, you're adding not just the lines for each of the characters, but you're adding a lot more emotion, more of a background, more of the history and timeline of where they're at and what's going on and what exactly they're doing as each character speaking to one another. Where in the screenplay format, I'm just adding the lines with the characters and giving the mood, what they may look like. I'm just not adding as much as I would to a book. I would say I'm cutting out 3/4 of the book just for the screenplay alone. And that can be, to me, a little tedious and tense because knowing only what you're going to need for the screenplay versus what you're going to put in for the book, and you're just so much more. And it's like the comfortable spot and feeling when I'm writing the screenplay, I can just say, St. Peter's really unhappy. He's not liking the way things are being said, but yet he continues to read from the Book of Souls. And then I just kind of continue on with each character's words. So in that transition, I fall more in my screenplay side where I work better with that than I do a book. And trying to write a book, there's a lot more that my mind it just wants to race. So I stick with the screenplay side on it.
And in this case, it was your story and your book, and then you transform that into screenplay. As a writer, would you be interested in writing screenplay for anyone else's book or anyone else's novel?
Maybe down the road, because at the time right now, with what I'm doing, I just got done putting the final words on paper for my last one of this series. I've ended it all, and I got a lot more work to do on it. I still have to put it into the computer. I've got a lot of formatting. There's going to be a lot of editing to do to it. I have I got a lot of work. I've got about 210 pages of a screenplay to put into the computer, and yeah, then it's going to take me a while to do that. Besides, like I said, all the formatting and editing, then I've got to send it off to be edited again by somebody else, and then make sure that it's probably cut down to a lot more and condense it all even more, and then see what I do on festivals if I decide to send it out. Like I said, I still got these three that are still in the works for festivals, and I've been querying managers. So right now, for me to even think about wanting to do that for somebody else, I've got to get my work completed first.
That was just a hypothetical question that you said you you like to write a screenplay, and I was just curious that is that something you would want to do? And
Down the road, it would probably be an enjoyable piece to try and do. Then it kind of depends on what the person is wanting from their book as a screenplay. So that would be a tough decision right off the hand.
yeah, and I asked that because from what I have seen by talking to writers and my friends is that writing is probably a little bit easier than writing a screenplay. And you told me that to you, the screenplay comes first and then you write that naturally. So that's why I was just curious whether you would do that for anyone else's.
Oh, wow. Like I said, it would be how they would want it, the way
Yeah.
they want it. A lot of people will take and want to turn their book into a screenplay, but I would probably, I'd be wanting to sit with the writer themselves and ask them why they wanted to turn it into a screenplay and what they're looking for and how, like I said, how they want it, characters, emotion, because you're taking a lot from a book and you're condensing it down into a screenplay. So that would be a challenge, but that's not a challenge that I could do right now. It would be fun, but I would be waiting.
And I request writers that if they can share anything they have heard about their book, any testimonial that they have got on their writing, if you would like to share anything with our listeners today.
On testimonial, I think there's only been a few. They were that's really hard to say because some of them say, why would you write something like this? And some say, where's the rest of the story? And the honest to God question for that one is the story is never over, for one. On the first part of people asking me why I would write something like this, why not? I mean, why not write something that a lot of people could understand? A lot of people they could really just sit there and say, I've been through this. I know what's going on here, but I'm still alive. They can understand why things were written. Testimonial in a lot of parts has been mixed. I've had people, my kids, they've read things to me, and it's like everybody is allowed to speak their mind and their opinion. Testimonials, I've really never have gotten, it's always been mixed. So I don't keep them in my mind too much. I have to let people formulate their own answers.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think I went through what I had in mind to talk to you about. Is there anything else you would like to share with the listeners today?
I would say continue listening to you. Check out your podcast as much as I can. For those out there listening or they're writing or even reading, don't stop. Whenever you write, everybody wants to write something special that nobody else has ever read, or they want to write for themselves. Sometimes it's really good to share, always share what you're writing, and just take your time, relax, and always remember that you're the writer. You can let people read what you have when the time is right. Writing a book, writing a screenplay, writing poetry, the writer will always release it when they know the time is right. I mean, that's the best way that I can really sit and say about anything right now when it comes to writing.
That's a very good advice. Thank you for sharing that and taking the time to talk to Stories and Stanza today.
Thank you.